to Retro Groove. Enjoy your voyage. Retro Groove. Retro Groove. Retro Groove. Retro Groove.
Howdy, welcome to Retro Groove. I'm Adam C.
And I'm Liam D.
And this is a podcast where we talk about music that stands the test of time, the albums and artists that have shaped and reshaped the sonic landscape, as well as covering new music from those artists. Liam, how you doing today, bud?
I am good. You are catching me fresh off the dance floor about 30 minutes ago.
You're traveling.
I was at a wedding. Yeah. I'm traveling for a wedding, and yeah, man, it's been a while since I was kind of boogieing at one of these things. So, kind of fun.
So, any notable tunes that came
yeah,
came over the speakers?
In my demographic, it's Third Eye Blind, Semi Charmed Kind of Life, and the whole place
Nice.
just goes nuts.
The happiest song about drug addiction there ever was.
Yeah, I kind of turned because it was there wasn't like a DJ or a band. It was literally just like the bridegroom's family had put together a playlist, which is cool. Like it can work. And I turned to the person that I knew who was setting it up, and I was like, "Are we going to hear about panties and mattresses and stuff? Like, is this the full thing?" And they're like, "Yeah, this isn't the radio edit." And I'm like, "Cool, your grandma's here, but whatever, that's fine."
Well, it's better than WAP or whatever else you might hear. So
I mean, yeah,
it could get
Yeah,
it could have been
true.
worse.
Yeah.
It could have been worse.
Yeah.
But cool.
How about you?
Glad you had fun. Just been working a lot. Had a relaxing Saturday. Didn't really do too much. I was finally able to. Oh, I bought a new lawnmower. There's that. That's always.
Ooh, nice.
Yes, I got the 40-volt battery powered Ryobi.
An electric lawnmower.
Yes. So
Okay, you like it?
I have never. This is going to sound like a commercial right now, and I promise we are not paid by anybody.
Please.
But I have never had such a pleasurable lawn mowing experience in my life.
Wow. So I got to tell you, so my neighbor across the street from me showed up with an electric lawnmower. And I'm definitely the guy who goes out there every week or two, kicks my thing up. I've had the same lawnmower for 4 or 5 years, and I do it myself. I actually mowed my neighbor's yard this week because it'd been like, he's an older dude. I don't even know if he's there anymore, honestly. And he,
Oh, that's nice of you.
it was like 4 or 5 weeks since it had been mowed. And I was like, all right, I got to do something here. But I've seen him out there with his electric thing, and I'm getting a little jealous. And I keep kind of saying to myself, like, there's no way an electric lawnmower is actually good. But if you're telling me it's good, I might need to look into this.
So I was honestly impressed because a couple of times I had borrowed my brother's plug-in electric lawnmower, and I was honestly surprised at how difficult it was to mow some heavy, tall areas.
Oh.
It would get bogged down. This one seems to, instead of getting bogged down when it hits a heavy patch, it actually seems to give itself a boost of power. So it's, I haven't had any problems whatsoever. So that's, I've used it
Nice,
twice
okay.
now. So, cause I've got, for some reason, I've got one patch of grass that grows like 3 times faster than the rest of the yard. So it's like that
happens,
one little
yeah.
patch I have to get, more frequently. And so I've done the whole yard once and that little patch a second time. And man, it's been amazing. Number one, not having to deal with the extension cord and move that around the yard and worry about, running over that and, what's it snagged on and all that stuff. So, or, dealing with a gas powered lawnmower. So
Oil and
So
Actually, this ties into things nicely, though. I would like to know. So when I was mowing the lawns this past week, I was listening to a little Wu-Tang.
Nice.
And part of that is because I had been I'd been on a bit of a kick, and I had been listening in my car. And while I am in favor of not censoring my daughter's music experience too much, like I'm open to her hearing more than maybe most parents would, I like that came on, and for like 10 seconds I was okay with it, and I was like, yeah, no, there's not.
Yeah.
I can't keep this on at all. Yeah. So and I was driving my kid around a bunch this past week, so I was like, this will be my lawnmower music.
Yeah.
So I wonder, do you have lawnmower music, or do you do podcasts? What do you listen to?
No, I definitely try to, I put on aggressive music when I'm mowing the lawn. Number one,
okay.
it's louder, so it kind of overpowers the sound of the motor, but also, it's not necessarily, I mean, don't get me wrong. It was fun to get out there and use the new battery powered one, but it's not typically the most engaging or fun chore. So having that kind of, music that would get your heart rate going, that actually helps quite a bit. It's like, you put on workout music, the music that'll get you pumped up, that you want to move around. So I'll listen to, Rage Against the Machine or At the Drive-In or something more aggressive, to,
cool.
get it done quicker. But
nice.
Yeah, so this week it was, which we'll talk about a little bit, but this week it started out as At the Drive-In. And I put on Relationship of Command, and then I was like, oh, you know what? I haven't gone down what rabbit hole I haven't gone down recently is the Mars Volta. So that threw me down that rabbit hole, as I will tend to revisit usually once a year or so, maybe twice. I'll go down that rabbit hole. So that's how that started. That's how that rabbit hole started Volta, this year. Yes. So this right now,
you were getting deloused in the comatorium while you were mowing your lawn.
Absolutely. Cool. Yep. That's nice. How it happened. So it was a good experience.
Yeah. I said there's a couple. I mean, there's a few Mars Volta albums that I think are great. I loved Francis the Mute. Obviously, Deloused is great. And Bedlam and Goliath. I remember listening to the third Mars Volta album, and it wasn't my speed for whatever reason. It just didn't connect with me. And then the fourth album, that was almost a cover to cover thing for me, which I remember being surprised about. I was like, wow, I really still like this band a lot. That's pretty crazy. Fantastic. I do wish that they were still doing stuff together.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure, what happened there. But maybe we'll see a reunion at some point soon. But so on that note, what else have you been listening to, and did you buy anything recently?
Yeah. So I haven't bought much of anything, on our drive. So we had a pretty long drive to get up to this very rural area for the wedding. And my dad's a classically trained, acoustic guitar player. Mm-hmm. And so there's this musician that I really like. I found a few years ago, William Tyler, instrumental albums, but there's just something special about it. It's got a little Nick Drake kind of vibe to it.
Oh, nice.
But it's, it's acoustic playing, but there's some orchestration to it. So I threw that on, and then we were listening to a bunch of Huey Lewis, because Huey Lewis is the man.
Nice. Yes.
But one thing that I was definitely listening to is OK Computer, like we discussed last time.
So at some point,
I gotta say, man,
we got to talk about how that went.
It went really well. So just a refresher. So it was a long, hour and a half drive solo at night after a work event. And that album's fantastic. That album,
it's a great album.
It definitely hit me a lot better than I know that I've listened to that album a few times. I think having that conversation having some points kind of stuck out to me, but also like going back to the bends and giving myself a refresher and taking it there. I really think that Kid A derailed me, man. And like, I don't know. Now I have to see if I can get into the Kid A Amnesiac kind of era of things, because I haven't ventured there yet. I've gone back and I listened to OK Computer cover to cover on that drive. And then I went back to a bunch of songs on it here or there, and it's fantastic. I don't know if I feel like I need to spend more time with it, kind of like you would have if you were a fan in the time, before I'm ready for Kid A to sink into me. I don't think I'm ready for that yet.
Yeah, it's hard. And honestly, look, there was a lot of people that kind of lost interest once Kid A came out. It was kind of a divisive album. And those of us that were big fans of OK Computer, we had 3 or 4 years to digest that album and, pour over every note and every syllable before, the anticipation and the buildup and the eventual release of Kid A. So, it's hard to replicate that 20 years later. So I totally don't blame you, particularly with an album like Kid A. If you just can't end up getting into it, if you have to skip forward a little bit to In Rainbows, that's totally fine. You can still be a Radiohead fan. I still consider myself a Weezer fan, and I only like 2 albums. So you know what I mean? You can not to go there, but
yeah, fair enough.
You can totally still be a Radiohead fan.
But speaking of Radiohead, I feel like you've got something cooking over there too, right?
Yeah. So little did I know when we recorded our last episode where I did my best to expand your mind on Radiohead, that the day that the episode dropped would be the day that they announced the Kid A Amnesia release, which will be forthcoming, a triple album set with half speed vinyl masters of both Kid A and Amnesiac, and a third album of unreleased material, reworked recordings and things like that. So that'll be really interesting to hear. So I got my pre-order in for that. Really excited to see that. I did contemplate, but ended up deciding not to spring for the $120, deluxe art book. You know what I mean? It's like the cream colored vinyl would have been cool, but it's like, I'm not the kind of person, like, they may be one of my favorite bands, but I'm not about to pay an extra $60 for an art book that I might look at one time. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'll be happy with just the music itself.
Nice. What else?
So I did, like I talked about last episode, I did my best, but I could not find the Spoon album, A Series of Sneaks, locally. I went to all my locals, and I called around a couple places that I don't even typically go to, but no one had it physically. So I was like, all right, I'm only one album away. I'm just going to go ahead and order it. I ordered it from a record shop in Brooklyn, actually, Norman's Sound and Vision, I believe it's called. And then had a little bit of a scare because I ordered it the day before the storm hit. And there was all that flooding in New York. And then typically, when I order something through Discogs, when I order something through Discogs, I'll get usually like an immediate, invoice and then an immediate response once I make the payment. But I kind of had radio silence from them for like 3 days. And I was like, oh no, did their store and inventory get flooded? Like, what happened? Thankfully, nothing happened. It was just a holiday weekend. So it turned out to be fine. But that kind of gave me a little bit of a scare, but a series of sneaks is on the way. And so that is going to be the final album, at least up to this point, until they release something else, for Spoon full length, studio albums. So I'm excited to get that. That's on its way. Should get here, by the time this airs. I had a pretty decent Goodwill score. It's very
I saw a picture
rare. I posted it in the Discord. It's very rare to find anything even halfway decent at any thrift shop, but I always check for speakers, and sometimes you can find some halfway decent vintage hi-fi equipment. Sometimes I'll clean it up and resell it, or save it, or give it to somebody else. And I happened upon a pretty decent size stack of vinyl, which is, it's usually just maybe a stack of couple dozen or so, but they had well over 200 LPs to look through. And obviously, you've always got your Morbid Tabernacle Choir and Anne Murray and all that kind of stuff in droves. But I actually got some decent stuff. They had Arlo Guthrie. I got Alice's Restaurant in decent condition. I got a Steve Martin album, John Denver, a couple of Ventures albums. Joni Mitchell, James Taylor, Joan Baez. I also found the Stanley Kubrick's Clockwork Orange soundtrack, which was kind of an interesting find. That'll be fun to dive in and listen to. And then I got also found a Disney Christmas album. We kind of have a Disney collection going. My kids and I. She actually picked up Sleeping Beauty recently, and so I was glad to find some official Disney vinyl as well. I think this release is from the 80s or late 70s. I'll have to double check. I haven't brought it in and cleaned it up yet, but yeah, had a decent haul. I also found a turntable, as if I need another one, but for $10, I would be remiss if I didn't, give it a good home. I found a Pioneer PL 600, needs a new belt and probably needs a new stylus, but for $20 or $30, I can fix that up and either give it to somebody to get them started on their journey down this path, or have it as a garage setup or something like that. So that was fun. I was so always feels good to get have some good finds at the thrift shop. Cool. Talked about Mars Volta. The other thing that I was listening to, I did give the Casey Musgraves album a listen. And I went in, I'm a sucker for a breakup album. And I went in expecting to have my heart ripped out and stomped on. It's not a bad album. It's just probably not quite what I was expecting. It didn't really rip my heart out and stomp on it. There's some good tunes on it. I think it was a lot more pop than I was expecting, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just wasn't quite what I thought I was getting into. I was expecting kind of more of a heartbreaking country album, full of scorned Southern woman fervor, and I didn't really get that. It's not a bad album, and I'm definitely not disparaging it. It just was not what I, for some reason, came into it expecting. It's a good album,
if you
though.
go into it thinking that you're going to get the flip side, basically, of Golden Hour, where you had that kind of optimistic and instead this is very kind of reflective in an odd way, where it's like, instead of it being a scorned album, it's more so like what is life? What am I doing? What is this all for? It's very much framed.
It's
in
like a quarter
that
life
realm
crisis
instead.
kind of album.
A little bit, yeah.
And
Yeah,
again,
for sure.
that's not a bad thing. And there are some great songs
Right.
that I will definitely go back and listen to, but it wasn't quite what I was expecting, and it's not a front to back listen for me from here on out. But she's got a great voice, and she's, you know, one of the few modern country artists that I pay attention to and enjoy. All right. So we have a few.
So you
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, a couple things. I was going to say you mentioned Christmas music and some of the stuff that you were digging through, and we are getting close to that season, and I think we'll know about some more stuff as we get even closer.
Always.
But I'm wondering if you have staples, and it might be a good future episode for us to kind of dig in a bit more on some of this stuff, because I think that there are some standards. But it's always interesting to me to see who's coming out this year, who is trying to kind of capitalize on that. I think of that like running thread through the movie Love Actually, where like you do have that every year who's competing for what the sound of the holidays or the song of the holidays is going to be. And you had Steve Perry randomly from Journey, the guy who like disappeared for 20 somewhat years
Right.
or whatever, came out with a solo album a few years back and now has a Christmas album apparently.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm interested to see what that sounds like. Yeah.
That will be interesting.
And Rob Thomas from Matchbox 20 has thrown his hat in the ring.
Why
I
not?
like Matchbox 20. It could be interesting. Yeah. It seems right up the alley. And then it sounds like Train, who they've put out a Christmas album recently a few years ago, but they like are shooting a Hallmark thing and they're going to add some songs to it.
God.
And I think like there's like that whole momentum of like, you can put out a Christmas album and you can tour on it every year if you want to, and you can just add Jingle Bells the next year or something like that. Right. It's so crazy. But it's a machine, man. And so I'm wondering, like, we definitely, there's a Bright Eyes Christmas album that always gets thrown on. And then you have the Peanuts LP that gets thrown
that's a
on. The
staple.
Christmas holiday Peanuts one gets thrown on. But I'm wondering if there's anything else that comes to mind in your household that you usually toss on.
Yeah, definitely. There's a small handful that go through the rotation. I think I talked about it on a prior episode, but there is a collection of songs from Louis Armstrong and Ella Fitzgerald. And some of them are duets and some of them are one or the other, but it's a great collection. I have that on CD. Vince Guaraldi, like you just mentioned. There's a Disney album that sees rotation. That's a little bit more like you play it once just for fun, and then it doesn't get repeat plays necessarily.
Right.
We will also throw on the Burl Ives Christmas album. That definitely gets play. And that is pretty much it for regular Christmas albums. Sometimes I'll throw on Brian Setzer Orchestra. I don't own that album or I'm not sure if he has an actual full album out. But
he does.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'll make a playlist and throw in a bunch of Brian Setzer, especially if we're having a party or something like that. I'll have a whole bunch of that along with some other lively staples in the background. But that's about it for us. There is one more that I forgot. And I did find it within the past couple years on vinyl. Actually, when I was growing up, my mom would put on the Amy Grant Christmas album. She had the cassette.
Nice.
tape,
Amy's great.
and we would listen to it every single Christmas. So that
Fantastic.
Christmas album is burned into my memory. And so I found it one day. I actually think I found it at a Goodwill as well, but this was a few years back. So I have that album on vinyl now, and that gets played at least once or twice during the Christmas season, even just for nostalgia's sake, because that was playing every single Christmas throughout my childhood. So I have that on at least once on Christmas Day.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I think that we can, like I said, we can have another conversation as we get closer about TSO, Mannheim Steamroller, like that whole air, like the that Christmas whole world machine of just so crazy. Yeah. I did want to mention, so since we last recorded, there was an article that had come out saying, and I think you had posted it in the Discord, about Phil Collins likely not being able to play drums again, and maybe not being able to tour again after this next Genesis tour, which has been kind of postponed because of COVID a few times. And just like everything else they're trying to figure out how they're going to do this. But I think his son is going to be playing on the tour, and it seems like this will be the last quote unquote Genesis tour that might ever happen. So it is weird to think that, and again, like, it's morbid. We talked about it in the Discord a little bit.
Yeah.
But, not just losing artists, but losing the opportunity to see Mick Fleetwood play the drums on a Fleetwood Mac thing, like, or the fact that, Lindsey Buckingham split with them, and so maybe you won't get to see Lindsey Buckingham play with Fleetwood Mac again. We're not only facing the mortality of these artists, like, not existing or not being able to make music anymore, but like not even being able to perform the music that they were able to perform back in the day.
Yeah, that's almost more bummer, heartbreaking, man. I mean, to me. Like, if you know what I mean. Yeah, if you pass away, that's tragic and sad. But there's something that seems so torturous to me about an artist.
Yeah.
That literally. And I actually also was reading an interview recently with David Crosby, who is going through similar issues where his health is making it difficult, if not impossible, for him to pick up a guitar and play. And that's, as a musician myself, that's something that I have a very difficult time wrapping my mind around that, and how disturbing that sounds to me. So I'm glad that Phil is able to get out there and still tour and sing with Genesis. But yeah, it's got to be rough as a drummer to not be able to be behind the kit and doing what you've done for most of your life. That brought you so much joy and success, you know what I mean? And it's like, you can't physically do it anymore. It's pretty heartbreaking.
Yeah. And then the last thing that I wanted to bring up is the Mercury Prize was awarded recently. For those not familiar with it, because we do wind up getting into the kind of Grammy US centric. A lot of the music that we consume is based here, but obviously we've had so much influence and so many great artists from the UK. And so their record industry, their like association of record dealers and whatnot, created this thing. And it was in an alternative to the Brit Awards. But each year they pick an album by an artist that they will kind of spotlight. And so this year they picked Arlo Parks' album, which she's fantastic. It's a gorgeous album. But some of the past winners like to put her in the pantheon. I mean, PJ Harvey's won this twice, Arctic Monkeys, the XX, Alt J, Portishead, Primal Scream, like this is a legit thing, or a legitimizing award for the British music community, and so it's exciting. It's exciting to see a very young. I mean, this is her first album. It's pretty huge that it got as big as it did, and I think I've talked about it a few times. But you do have this new generation of singer-songwriters, Phoebe Bridgers being the one that is easiest to point to, but Arlo Parks is right up there with these like new young voices who are so articulate and writing these beautifully crafted, challenging songs. So definitely worth checking out some of her tunes for sure. And congrats to her for that.
Yeah, I've heard the name, but I honestly have not heard her music at all yet. So I'm excited to have something new to dive into for sure. Congrats to her.
So we have a few things that are in our music history stuff here, right?
Yeah, and unfortunately, this week is riddled with some tragic deaths, and so we'll go through those. But first and foremost, on September 18th, 1970, was the day Jimi Hendrix was pronounced dead. He was actually pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital in London, age of 27, part of the 27 Club, as we all know. But then September 20th...
We'll touch on one of those later.
Yeah. September 20th, 1973, Jim Croce, U.S. singer-songwriter, was killed along with 5 other people in a chartered airplane that crashed on takeoff. And I love Jim Croce. I'll listen to it every once in a while, but man, that's one of those artists that I have a hard time. It's an emotional roller coaster listening to Jim Croce for sure. And this is partly why.
Really? Oh, interesting.
Yeah. It's
because he died.
That part of it. I don't know. It just Time in a Bottle, you just listen to the lyrics and it's really sad. You know what I mean? It's just kind of heartbreaking. Yeah. So I think that in combination with his tragic death, I also tend to associate him with my aunt on my mom's side, my mom's sister, who was kind of like a second mother to me. And she passed when I was 13. So that's our 14.
And she sang his songs or?
It's just a lot of that, Jim Croce and I have one of her Neil Young albums actually. So some of those artists and albums that I associate with her, I will still listen to them, but it's like, it's heartbreaking to listen to. And sometimes that's great.
It's interesting.
Sometimes it's cathartic, but
it's interesting that you have, because I also have a family association with Jim Croce. So that's interesting that you and I mean, we've never talked about this before. So back in the day, I'm fairly large family, at least on my mom's side. And so on Thanksgivings, we would all get together, and by like the 3rd or 4th hour, somebody would have busted out the keyboard and the guitars and everyone was singing songs. And I remember being very young and hearing about 10 of my relatives sing Bad, Bad Leroy Brown. I don't know why they picked that song to sing. It's such a weird song for a family to sing.
It is kind of a weird song.
I remember
family sing along.
It is. Yeah. And especially because like the lyrics are kind of bizarre. I remember there's the line, Leroy looked like a jigsaw puzzle with a couple of pieces gone. But I remember sitting there playing my Game Boy as a kid, like on the couch, like tired of Thanksgiving, and hearing that song and being like, what is this? And what, like, I have such a visceral memory of that song and my family's connection to it. And they sang it every year, dude. I don't know why. It was so weird. So when I saw this on the notes, I was like, all right, well, I've got a family connection here for sure. And then it obviously in later years then discovered who he was and Operator and some of the other great songs. But it's funny that you and I both kind of have like a deep rooted visceral feeling about his music.
Yeah.
It goes to show you.
It's funny that they're kind of opposite ends of the spectrum too.
They are,
as far as the songs very much themselves. That's a great song though. I would love to have a family sing along with that song with my family. With
Bad, Bad Leroy Brown.
Yeah, that'd be great. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that. That's amazing.
Yeah, of course.
And then September 21st, 1987. And I actually, this is new information for me. I didn't know how he died, but American jazz bassist Jaco Pastorius died from injuries sustained in a fight. I guess he was
geez.
trying to enter a nightclub where he had been banned and got into a fight with the bouncer, and he ended up getting severely injured, fell into a coma, was put on life support, and he died from his injuries from that fight. And then, if you don't know who he is, he was in the kind of progressive jazz band Weather Report. In 2006, he was in Weather Report, and in 2006 he was voted the greatest bass player who ever lived by the readers of Bass Guitar Magazine. So he's
I thought that was Sting. Okay, cool, that's great.
Oh man, I'm laughing even harder than I normally would have at that because we're watching Only Murders in the Building. Have you started watching that yet with Steve Martin?
No, I want to. I heard he's in that. Yeah.
Sting is in the show as himself.
That's amazing.
And it is hilarious.
Oh, that's great.
So I laughed even harder than I normally would have
That's
at
awesome.
that joke.
That's hilarious. Yeah, that's funny.
But man,
I definitely want to watch that show. I'm excited for it.
Yes, it's fantastic. All right, and just a handful of birthdays.
I mean, I got to say, you kind of set us up here for our B-side nicely with 3 really tragic music history notes here, and then we'll be talking about Jim Morrison.
Yep. It's a dark episode. What can I say?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
we didn't plan it, and we're recording it on September 11th, so it's a dark day.
That's true.
So
yeah.
But let's celebrate some birthdays just to liven it up a little bit.
Sure.
September 19th, 1952, American musician, producer, guitar player, Nile Rodgers, who was the lead guitarist and co-founder of Chic. I've got a couple of Chic albums. They had a #1 single, Le Freak. Also produced Diana Ross, Sister Sledge, David Bowie, a couple of his hits from the early 80s. And then obviously recently did work with Daft Punk on their Random Access Memories album. So happy birthday to Nile.
And his sample, I've been digging through this history of hip hop book that's just fantastic. And I'm a very slow reader, but like digging into Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang and its iconic sample of Good Times by Chic, and how that was kind of an unprecedented thing because hip hop wasn't, and the sampling thing wasn't what it is now and what it has been, especially with EDM music, but in hip hop culture, and how Nile was like, he was just such a cool guy about the whole thing. Like he could have been really annoyed that his song was being kind of repackaged and sampled and put out there and sold a bunch. What an important icon in many genres of music,
for sure. And I feel like he's enough of a visionary that he saw what was going on and saw the inevitability of that. And
for sure,
talk about
Embraced
Rapper's Delight. That was basically the birth of kind of modern hip hop as we know it. So
for sure. Yeah.
He is very influential in a number of different ways. Speaking of influential, September 21st, 1934, Leonard Cohen was born. Canadian singer-songwriter, also a painter, poet, and a novelist. Probably best known for writing Hallelujah, which has been covered way too many times. But I'll allow it for Jeff Buckley, but that's basically it. And then also on September 21st in 1972, Liam Gallagher of Oasis. And then we have September 22nd. Yep. 1957, Nick Cave of Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, Australian singer-songwriter. And then one of my favorites, September 22nd, 1958, Joan Jett, American rock guitar player, singer, songwriter, producer, founding member of the Runaways, and then Joan Jett and the Blackhearts. So I don't know. I'm a fan of scary women. I enjoy it.
I dig it, man. Yeah. She's a badass.
All right. So we're about to flip it over to side B. And if you
That's
missed
right.
our last episode, we started a new segment entitled Expand My Mind. And we just thought it would be a good opportunity with the kind of, long form conversation that we have on this podcast where we can really dive deep into some stuff to try to tackle artists that we just either don't quite get, don't fully understand, or maybe even flat out dislike. And so last episode, and I don't know if you want to, you talked about OK Computer and your positive experience with that. So if you want to expound on that, that's totally cool. But in this episode, Liam is going to attempt to expand my mind when it comes to the topic of The Doors and Jim Morrison.
That's right.
I, for whatever reason, simply, and I'm a big classic rock fan. I love, all of those 60s and 70s bands, from the super popular to the obscure. Yeah, exactly. Pretty, open-minded and all of that. I have an active dislike for the Doors and Jim Morrison. And I can't even, cause I thought about it because I knew we were going to have this episode coming up, but I can't even quite put my finger on it. So maybe we're going
to figure it out.
Maybe we'll get to the root of that. But that will happen in just a moment here on side B, and hang with us as we flip it over. We'll see you in a minute. Side B of this 9th episode of Retro Groove. Thank you for flipping it over with us. This is the second part of our new segment that we've titled Expand My Mind. And last week, as we mentioned, I took the opportunity to go front to back with the Radiohead discography in an attempt to expand Liam's mind a little bit, because he was in the ballpark of not quite getting the hype, I guess you could say. Is that an accurate?
It never. Yeah. I mean, I think that you and I, obviously there's different bands and different types of music and then our relationships with them. But Radiohead is not a band that fits that kind of easy pop, tap your foot and you get it and it's over and you move along.
Certainly
and
not.
It's a great pop song. No, Radiohead you need to have a connection with, you need to work on, you need to explore. And like I had said the last time, I don't think that I ever honestly had someone who kind of walked me through it or explained to me the virtues and the message and the craft of that band. I think I got on a few stops too late on that train. And then I was just kind of like, yeah, of course. Yeah. Radiohead. Sure. Yeah. That's awesome. Good job. So let's talk about something else.
Right.
And And so I appreciate the opportunity last time. Walking through all this stuff definitely helped. And I now, like, I can feel my understanding and my appreciation and my desire to listen to the band growing.
Nice.
I mean, I never had a desire to go and listen to them. And I now have selectively chosen to go back to the Bends and OK Computer. So I feel the seed is planted.
Great.
I feel it's watered and it's growing. And I appreciate it. I feel like this one's probably going to be a little different. I think that's going to be the nature of this segment as we do it here and there, because we have different relationships with music, as is the nature of it. I would love to. I think there's a framework for a lot of this that probably is the same, which is starting with your first impression. I think that first impressions, or your initial experiences, at least with a band or a sound or an album or a song, are so impactful.
Yeah.
So I'm going to share mine, but I would love to start by asking, do you have any recollection of how you were first exposed to who the Doors are, or what song it might have been, or what your initial gut is telling you about, like, when you first heard of or thought of the Doors, you thought blank? Any of those things that come to mind?
Yeah. So it wasn't something that was played in my house when I was a kid. So it doesn't have that same kind of impact that might have gotten, hearing it in a safe environment, like your home. It's like, oh, this is one of my parents' albums, or my parents put this on, that kind of thing. The first recollection that I have of hearing the Doors is driving with a friend of mine with his dad, and his dad had it playing. And I seem to remember him saying,
his dad like? Was he creepy?
He was an interesting guy. I don't know. If that played too much into it, but I seem to remember him saying something like, "Hey, don't listen to these lyrics," or something along, like he had it playing, but he was like, he kind of discouraged us from paying too close attention to the words. So maybe that kind of got me off on the wrong foot. Like, oh, should I actually be listening to this? And I seem to remember the wrap your legs around my neck. Yeah. Something that I probably shouldn't have been listening to at, probably 10 or 11, I would say I was. Yeah. So, old enough to understand what that meant. But, that's, I'm sure I probably heard a song or something on the radio prior to that, but that was my first, I'm listening to the Doors and I know who Jim Morrison is. That's the first I can remember, actively knowing that. And I didn't hate it, but I didn't really necessarily enjoy it either. That's the earliest memory that I have. Okay.
It's interesting because you and I then definitely heard the band at the same point in our lives, or just about. I think what you said is kind of spot on, though. I discovered them when I was 9, and I had gone from having just a radio to a radio that had a CD player, and a cassette player, so I could record songs off the radio. And I had been doing that, and I'd heard a song or two. I think I'd heard "Touch Me," and I love that song. I think that song's fantastic. But I remember I had a new boombox radio, and I didn't have CDs to play on it, and I hadn't bought my Weird Al CD yet. So I went into the closet on like next to our living room, where my parents kept some of the random CDs that they had for whatever reason, and one of them was The Doors. It was the first Doors album. And I remember taking like a collection, like a Rolling Stones magazine compilation, and the Doors album and an REM album or something like that, and bringing them all up to my room. And that was what I was going to be listening to, because that's the physical 3 CDs that I had at that time. And I remember putting it on, and I skipped around a little bit. I definitely didn't listen to like the Crystal Ship or anything, but I remember like Light My Fire is so catchy. And Break On Through to the Other Side is bizarre, but it's a catchy pop song too. But I remember getting to the last song, which is The End. And it was mystifying to me. And I didn't know anything about this band. It wasn't something like, my dad spoke highly of them as I like emerged with this CD. And I was like, what is this? My dad, both my parents were fans, and they shared their fandom with me, and it stuck. So there's definitely that too. But there is this enigma to their music. There's this like, etherealness that hit me as a kid of like, I've been hearing pop songs, and I've been hearing classic rock, and this is kind of classic rock, but I don't know what this is. I do have another question though before we continue on.
Yeah, definitely.
And that is, because I don't know if we've delved into this at all, but where are you with Steven Tyler and Mick Jagger and Roger Daltrey? Because I know that you're a fan of a lot of classic rock bands, but I don't know if we've ever talked about the sort of Alpha-esque, although some of those I listed don't always fit the bill, but that like predominant frontman, because that is going to be part of this conversation, is the first time that you have this hyper-sexualized leading man that is just, he's not Paul McCartney.
Right.
He's not the Everly Brothers. He's not even Elvis. He's beyond Elvis. Right. And so I'm wondering, like, do you have any feelings about when you see a frontman like that? Is it something that puts you off? Are you indifferent? Or is it, do you gravitate towards a strong frontman? Like what's your take there?
That's an interesting question, because I don't feel like I've ever really thought about that before. Obviously that was a huge phenomenon, particularly in the 70s and into the 80s, but because there are some that I really like and some that do just kind of rub me the wrong way. I'm typically really put off by the kind of cocky, like kind of arrogant types. That just kind of, that just kind of pisses me off a little bit. But there are some but it depends on the band. Like sometimes that completely
Does it work
works.
for Jagger for you?
I'm not a huge Rolling Stones fan. Like I like their music and I appreciate their music, but I wouldn't consider myself a Mick Jagger fan. I just like the music.
What about Steven Tyler?
I'm not an Aerosmith fan, so that's another difficult one to kind of get into.
I think we're finding a thread here. That's what I'm saying.
Okay, we could be touching on something, but I mean, I guess.
What about Iggy Pop?
I love Iggy Pop and I love the Stooges, and so I'm trying to think of.
That's interesting.
So like, who I really, really love is the Hives, and he and
oh my God, Pele.
He totally does the whole shtick. He does
hyper arrogant.
So, but I feel like when he does it and when the Hives do it, it's so tongue in cheek. Like it's almost like, and I could be completely wrong, but it at least feels like he's almost mocking that whole Mick Jagger frontman swagger type thing. He even kind of does some of the same sort of movements and same body language. But I'm trying to think of other. I don't have a problem with Robert Plant.
Freddie Mercury.
I love Freddie Mercury. Who doesn't love Freddie Mercury?
David Bowie.
David
right?
Bowie. But I think
but so those guys are all. I feel like you go into, and it's the same thing as Pele with the Hives. It's just in a different direction, but it gives you an out, I guess is the best way to put it. Of like, Jim Morrison was full on heterosexual, arrogant. Like, I'm going to spit in your face. Like, he was arrested on stage multiple times for indecent exposure, basically, right?
Yep.
Which back then was not much. Back then, it was just telling a cop the wrong words backstage and he got yanked off stage.
yeah.
Or he, like, pretended to do a sex act maybe on Robbie Krieger on the stage, and he got thrown off the stage.
Or even
and
just
arrested,
lyrics.
and sued. Yeah, exactly.
Like,
so we're talking about the 60s
right. And so I don't know if Robert Plant is in that same kind of group, but I don't have a problem with Robert Plant. I think what he did with Led Zeppelin was fantastic. So I don't quite know exactly what it is. Because
so let's do a little. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just saying that's it. I can't put my finger on it because it doesn't seem super consistent. Like Scott Weiland, I love Scott Weiland, and
Scott Weiland is Jim Morrison.
He pretty much. So I don't know what
really
it is.
was.
So some of them they give off the douchebag vibe to me, and it rubs me the wrong way. So, Roger Daltrey doesn't do it. Robert Plant doesn't do it. Scott Weiland doesn't do it. But I get the douchebag vibe from Jim Morrison, and I can't get away from it.
You don't get it from Joan Jett.
From who?
You don't get it from Joan Jett.
No, of course not.
I mean, she is. Yeah. What about Liam Gallagher, man? I mean, Liam Gallagher, probably one of the most arrogant frontmen since Jim Morrison.
I mean,
and
see with them,
Oasis.
it's just silly. You know what I mean? I feel like, and maybe it's because it's like British arrogance. I don't know. When Oasis does their thing, it just comes across as silly to me. I'm not sure why, but I love the arrogance of like Johnny Rotten and the Sex Pistols. Like, one of my favorite things is to go down the rabbit hole of television interviews with the Sex Pistols and just how freaking rude and obnoxious and arrogant they were to the hosts. And I love it. So I don't know what it is, man. I can't put my finger on it because it doesn't seem to be consistent.
That's what we're trying to figure out. That's the whole point of this exercise. So let's do a little more Jim talk, and then I want to get into the band before we go full circle. Jim Morrison, raised in a military household and was extraordinarily well read. Just like was reading highly elevated, like college beyond grad school level poetry and philosophy at the age of 14 and 15.
That makes sense.
Also in a very controlled environment where, you fast forward to when the doors are breaking, he gets a letter from his father, a military dad, saying that he's got a 3 record deal signed with Elektra. He's going on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he gets a letter from his dad saying, like, you have no talent. You should give this up and come home.
Oh my God.
Like it was a really bad situation. But anyway, so the guy is incredibly smart in this tight situation and is idolizing Elvis, right? And he goes to film school. He goes to art school, meets these other band members. And what you see throughout the very short tenure, I mean, the band is formed in 65. He dies, spoiler alert, in 71.
Yeah.
And you see the thread that happens throughout those 6 years is that he keeps wanting to stop performing and write poetry. And he does. He puts out a book. And then he's pulled back in. And in certain situations, he's pulled back in by the band members because they have this record deal and they're making a bunch of money.
Right.
And sometimes, honestly, to delve into it a little bit more, and this is me editorializing, I should say, he's pulled back in because he keeps finding this loneliness. Like there's a loneliness to being an academic and a poet.
Right.
And I think that rectifying his intelligence with the validation that he was looking for from his father and from his family, he got that as a performer. And so he would disappear for months and go wander a city and write these elaborate poems. But then he would be drawn back into performance because that's where he gets his actual validation. He got off from getting that exposure. So there's a lot going on there. Watching them perform on the Ed Sullivan Show. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but
No.
we've talked about the Beatles and the Everly Brothers, and you know what was happening on the Ed Sullivan Show at that time, and things were progressing. You can see. I mean, you had the Stones already as a presence. You had Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin starting to break. So it wasn't just the Doors doing this, but he gets out there and he's got this like snarly growl to him. And Ed Sullivan tells him they perform Light My Fire, and there's a lyric in it. We couldn't get much higher. And Ed tells them, you can't say that. It's a drug reference. You're not allowed to say that on TV. It's 1967. And they do it anyway. He goes out there and he does it anyway. And that is punk rock. That is like, I don't care the fact that I'm about to get the biggest national exposure that a band can get. And the kingmaker himself is putting me on his show and has given me, you have to change one word, and you absolutely refuse to do it.
Yeah, which I super respect. Like I love that. I do.
Yeah, it's tough. And then again, so you see him age by 20 years over the course of 5 years, and such a tortured person who ultimately dies in the 20 and as part of the 27 Club. He foresaw it. He talked about it. He was like, after Jimmy and Janis died, he did an interview and he's like, I'll be the third one. He's like, he knew it was going to happen. He didn't kill himself, but he basically did.
Close enough.
Yeah. He also he had no publicist. He had no there wasn't a Jim Morrison manager. They had a band manager, but it wasn't like the persona, how Gwen Stefani had her own person that was handling Gwen Stefani when there was still No Doubt. So all of the actions, the attire, the behavior, the way that he would interact with people in interviews and such was totally off the cuff. It was just him. And there is something, and again, this wasn't something that I understood when I was 9 or 10 years old hearing this music, but like, as I heard this stuff, getting older and learning more and more about it, like that did appeal to me to say like, this guy was just doing his thing. And there's a bunch of awful reasons why he wound up this way, but like so genuinely himself, like it was not a persona. And I will say that the opposite of that might be why you like Iggy Pop or like Scott Weiland or like Howlin' Pele, like, because you can say to yourself, there's a persona and then there's this, and I can rectify the two. So when they behave in a certain way, I can say, nah, that's the persona. And when they behave in a certain way that I like, you can be like, that's the real person. And I think with Jim Morrison, you kind of have to, I think you have to take the good and the bad. I think Jim Morrison was just always him.
That's who he was.
If you don't like people who just did a lot of LSD, like you're probably not into it. And I have very little drug experience. It's not my scene. And so I also wonder, like if you hear this music and it's in the context, kind of like I talked about how Radiohead was very gatekeepy with like some highbrow, like people hearing things in it that I can't taste the wine. Like if your exposure to the Doors is with a crowd or in a context of drug abuse or drug use or whatever it is, then it can be off-putting if that's not your scene. And I had a friend who was very into the Doors and and also was into drugs. And it did put me off of it a little bit. Like, you do get that associative thing.
That makes a lot of sense. I can see, why that particular connection was not something that I can see why that sort of connection was something that I didn't get at a younger age. And because I'm trying to think now if there's any other kind of quote unquote, because and you know what? I never really understood the Grateful Dead either. Like, I can appreciate them for what they do or what they've done. And
I put them in the same
impact that they had, but
kind of,
And I've even heard people say, like,
it's all fish to me.
Yeah. And I've literally heard people say, I did not understand the Grateful Dead until I went to a show and took LSD. Like, so, and so, you know what I mean? And maybe the Doors, you have to be in a certain specific state of mind. That could very well be the case. And yeah, you probably hit pretty well on the mark when you psychoanalyzed me a little bit, which I'm totally fine with. The persona is it's a very real thing that some people have to do that in order to perform. And some people can just be, completely and unabashedly themselves. And so I think there is definitely something to that. And it gives me a lot to think about as well in terms of, why I gravitate towards certain, lead musicians or lead singers or frontmen, or front women. Right. It's totally different with women, man. I feel like it's so different. Like I can't, it just doesn't, there doesn't seem to be that, like, I'm the cocky, arrogant, sex symbol.
Yeah, but Janis Joplin, Patti Smith, Joan Jett. I mean, it's not that far removed. It's not that far removed.
It feels so authentic though. I don't know.
Yeah. I think you're cheering for them a little bit more. You're like, oh, an arrogant guy. Yeah, I know 50 of those, but like a woman who's up on stage and taking control of a situation. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it also depends on, like, your mom. Like, we're not going to get that deep into psychoanalysis, but there's also probably, like, strong women in your family.
It's like, how much are you charging me per hour here, Liam? No, this is great.
Let's go real quick. Let's go real quick over to the band a bit more. So, Ray Manzarek, like, one of the most, you can say he was incredibly talented, but also just inspired in his use of the organ, the Vox Continental, the Rhodes. I mean, this is a band that, and again, we're getting into things that I did not know or understand as a 10-year-old, but there were aspects of this that do sink into you. This band didn't have a bass player. This band had a key player who, with one hand, was playing everything that you're hearing as the organ and key parts. And then with the other hand had a piano bass stacked on top of his keyboard that he was playing all the bass lines with. And there is something, I mean, it's incredibly dynamic, but also, like, nobody was really doing that at that point. And then you had Robbie Krieger, who, fantastic guitar player, was trained as a classical and flamenco, like, nylon string guitarist and picks up an electric guitar, never uses a guitar pick. So everything that you ever hear on the Doors albums, it's all finger picked. It's all him. And then a jazz influenced drummer.
Yeah, you can hear that.
You can see it Queen is such an interesting comparison for this band, and Nirvana is too. But I'm going to harp on Queen a little bit more, especially because I don't know. Did you see the Bohemian Rhapsody biopic, like the movie?
I actually didn't, and I am a big Queen fan. For whatever reason, I have not seen it yet.
Yeah, definitely worth watching. And you see. And again, things are editorialized in that, just like they are in the Doors, where Val Kilmer's Jim Morrison. Like there's truths and falses, but there's a dynamic with the band, and they start off with Jim in tandem, and Jim does not, even though he is the poet, he does not take writing credits for anything with the band until like the fourth album. Then you really start to see it split off a little bit. And you watch the splinter where you have the band and then you have the front man. And they have divergent opinions, and they're also having very different experiences. It's one thing to be Freddie Mercury, and it's another thing to be Queen. And so you have this band that starts off cohesive, and they're seeing, they're the house band at the Whiskey A Go-Go. They get discovered almost immediately, get that 3-album deal. They're on TV within a year and a half of the band forming. And these 3 guys, the other 3 band members, were also using acid or taking acid, but by the second album, they had basically dropped that and were like doing meditation, like they switched off of that, and Jim kind of kept going. And you see the fracturing as you get a little bit later on into like their discography. But the interesting thing, and this is one thing that I don't know if you're familiar with at all, but what songs of the Doors, if I say name 2 or 3 Doors songs, what are the ones that come to mind? Can you think of any off the top of your head?
Well, yeah, there's obviously, you have the hits like Light My Fire and Break On Through. I have a vivid memory of a high school band at the high school that I went to playing Break On Through and enjoying their rendition of it. I actually, and if I had to pick a Doors song that I do actually enjoy and could listen to the whole thing and enjoy it, it's actually Riders on the Storm. And
oh my God, yeah.
And it's kind of maybe a little bit of a departure for them. It doesn't quite sound like the quintessential Doors song.
Sure.
But those are the ones that come to my mind right off the top of my head.
I should say Riders on the Storm to me is one of my favorite Doors songs, but it also is disappointing in the sense that it's on the last album right before he died. We know that Jim had reached out to Robbie Krieger right before he died to say that he was writing and he wanted to do another album. And listening to Riders on the Storm as a fan in recent years again is you feel like, what could the next thing have been? If Riders on the Storm was that next stone, then there could have been something even greater, or it could have been trash. He was a mess. He was drinking. He kind of stopped his drug use a bit, and he just was a complete raging alcoholic. Like he was killing himself. So it could have been awful, but there is that thing to Riders on the Storm where you have this new elevation of this creative process of this band, and you're like, man, imagine what could have been next for them.
Wow. I didn't even know that.
The really interesting thing with them is, so everybody thinks of Jim Morrison, rightfully so. That's the story of the Doors. But Robbie Krieger, the guitar player, is actually the one who's writing the hits. Like Touch Me, Light My Fire, Love Me Two Times, Love Her Madly. Like these songs that all exploded were Robbie hits. And when you go back and listen to it, you can almost, because again, they don't really split out writing credits much. And it's only after the fact that you started to find out which songs he wrote and which songs Jim wrote. And when you go back and listen to their catalog, you can kind of start to pick out the songs that were pretty radio friendly, talking about love, talking about engaging with someone. And then there was these songs about the crystal ship and I'm the captain. Like you can tell,
Right.
like, you can tell like where the lines get drawn pretty clearly as you look at it. There was just as a fun note that like in my kind of refresher on this, I had one of those moments where I can't unhear something now.
Yeah.
So do you know the song "Hello, I Love You"? Won't you tell me your name? Does that sound? Yeah. There was a lawsuit before either of us were born when that came out, because that song is basically the Kinks all day and all night.
Oh,
like,
wow.
It's the exact same song. And there's like an interesting, it's not worth going into the whole thing here, but it's definitely worth looking up at some point. But you get into a very early situation of that kind of maybe plagiarism. Like the song was released in 1968, but written in 1965, but the Kinks song had come out the year before. So it was definitely ripped off. And Robbie Krieger would never admit to it. Apparently Jim Morrison told Ray Davies that like in person, he was like, yeah, sorry that happened. But a complete absolute mess.
Wow. I can't believe I never made that connection, but yeah,
you'll never
just
not hear
hearing
it
in my head and it's uncanny. Wow.
Yeah. You'll never not hear it. So I mean, I think the main thing then for me is you look at some of the impacts that we've already talked about. You look at your Kurt Cobain's, you look at The Cure. I mean, Iggy Pop. So after Jim dies, Iggy Pop was inspired to be a performer and be the kind of performer he was because he saw the Doors live. You know, like Nick Cave's first band their album was called Door Door. It was in tribute to the Doors.
Oh, wow.
There was Mick Jagger already. You know, it's not to say that there were no other frontmen, but there's nobody who broke down the Doors, so to speak, as well and as quickly and as fiercely as that band did. And I think that it just gave everyone that we've talked about since in their own formula of persona and what is actually them. Everybody was then kind of, because he was so 100% himself. I think everybody who has been a front person or a band leader or a persona of a band has had that flexibility where they could be Elvis, or they could be Jim Morrison, or you can be something in between that. And I'll say that if you go and listen to the catalog, you can hear he has a transition later on. They go back to their blues roots, which is the last thing that I kind of want to point out for you, knowing how much you like classic rock, but you also like blues centered rock. Yeah. I mean, on their last album, they do Crawling Kingsnake, and it's awesome. Like, it's so good. Like, if you just go listen to the LA Woman album, I'd say half of it is a blues album. But he goes from his Elvis worship early on in his career, the first 2 or 3 albums, and then he falls in love with Sinatra, and he becomes he wants to embody this kind of poetic crooner, and takes on a little of that persona, and the band follows suit, but they never lose their blues roots. And so you start to get this sexy Sinatra fronting a blues band. and it's with creepy circus organ sometimes in the background.
Right.
It's such a weird amalgam. But I'll throw it in the playlist and go through some of the stuff. But I would say go, as opposed to what we decided with me, where it's like the entry point really should be, right after the bends for me, and don't go ahead to Kid A or Amnesiac or even In Rainbows.
Right.
I think for you, go to LA Woman. Like, that's the last thing that they did. It was a comeback album for them. I think it's got all the blues familiarity for you, and his arrogance has changed from this bravado of trying to instigate and to get into fights with police and to push boundaries. And he had become the crooning poet that he wanted to be, while still having the arrogance. It's in there.
Yeah.
Like, you're not getting rid of that. Start with LA Woman, and then if anything, I would say maybe go backwards, because like Morrison Hotel has Roadhouse Blues, which is like it's a fantastic single, and it is a blues song.
And with a lot
so
of
yeah, man.
groups, whether modern or classic, working my way backwards, if I've not experienced their discography chronologically, just naturally, that actually tends to work really well for me. Not sure why, but I've been able to get into certain groups by using that method in the past. So if it's gonna happen, I'm gonna have to agree with
Give
you.
it a go.
That's gonna have to be the way to do it. And I'm glad you mentioned, kind of Riders on the Storm being potentially kind of a
That's on that album.
whisper of things that could have come later.
Yeah.
Because that is,
It really felt
that
like
is
it.
the one, like up to this point, that's the one. It's okay. That's the Door song that I actually could enjoy listening to. And just, forget for a second that it's the Doors and just enjoy it for what it is. All right. That, I've got a lot to chew on. I kind of felt like I had set you up to have a little bit of a more difficult task than I had, because I felt like with Radiohead, you kind of could see and appreciate what they did, and maybe even enjoy portions of it, but just kind of weren't a fan and didn't get some of it or some albums. And I for whatever reason had just kind of an active dislike for, I think it was in part my dislike for the arrogant bravado of Jim Morrison, the reports of him being kind of an asshole because he was an alcoholic.
Definitely an asshole.
But he was a human being, and he was a complex person, and there was, he wasn't a one-dimensional person. So I have to, I have to give him the benefit of the doubt there. And also the fact that I honestly, like, I thought most of their stuff was early to mid 70s. So I was way off on
66.
So
66,
I was actually
67.
off on my perception of, what kind of environment that this band came out of. And
The Who was opening for them.
that's crazy.
Who opened for the Doors? Yeah, it's insane.
That's crazy to think about. See, so I think a lot of it also was just my ignorance on a lot of these parts of the
we weren't
band.
around.
So
Neither of us were alive.
No.
Yeah.
and I think also just simply because, like, there was a lot of music in my house growing up, and the Doors was not part of that at all.
Yeah.
So I think that
it's
played a
exposure. It's 100%
huge role
exposure.
in my, not necessarily my dislike, but my complete ignorance on most aspects of who they were. Cause there was no internet back then. You know what I mean? If my daughter started to get interested in the Doors, you know, she would hop on Google and she can read a Wikipedia article and learn everything about them. You know what I mean? We didn't really have that.
No,
at least nothing to that extent.
Weird friend slipped you a disc.
And who knows if they're giving you accurate information. So,
for sure. I don't know what your relationship is with Pearl Jam. I don't think we've talked about them too much. But I think I'll leave the conversation with this, that as I thought of frontmen, leading men of a band, and you think of the authenticity as it balances with a persona, I don't think that I feel like Kurt Cobain is probably up there too. I don't think that there was much of a persona with Kurt. I think you were getting what you got. But and Eddie Vedder, he was the one who filled in. He filled in for Jim Morrison at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. He sang with the other 3 band members when they were inducted.
Oh wow!
But I don't think there's a better fitting person alive, I should say, that that does embody that genuineness of character as opposed to persona. The main difference between Eddie Vedder and Jim Morrison is the type of arrogance, or just arrogance in general. I mean, like, Eddie Vedder is very unassuming and very calculated and controlled. Whereas, you know, Jim Morrison was just looking to rip the world
apart. Out of control. Yeah. Which, and honestly, you know, there's something to like about that. You know what I mean? I think we all,
I mean, Eddie Vedder wasn't born he wasn't living during the Vietnam War.
Right.
Like you have to think about that too. Like, all of this is happening because you have the Kennedy assassination and then Vietnam, and it was insane. Like, it was a crazy time. I am not bummed that I missed it.
Yeah.
Didn't need that.
No, definitely not. Things are tough enough as they are now. It's kind of hard. It's hard in hindsight to say, you know, things were more or less, you know, difficult or chaotic than they were then. But it certainly wasn't the best of times. That's for sure. But man, we got a lot of really freaking great music out of it. Yeah,
that's true.
So I've got some homework to do, and I definitely feel like you have opened up. You have expanded my mind for sure, and I am open to digging through even songs that I previously would have told you that, I don't like that song, and kind of listening to them from a different perspective. And, you know, seeing if it grabs me, seeing how it, with new information and with a different perspective, if it takes me somewhere different than it used to.
Yeah. Listen to LA Woman, but skip, I think it's like the 6th or 7th song. It's called L'America. Yeah, you don't need that song, but everything else on there is awesome. Yeah, I mean, you got one song to skip.
There's not a whole lot of albums that don't have at least one song that you're like, I could do without that. I can skip that one.
Yeah, you don't need that one. L'America's weird.
Even the best groups on the planet. Speed bump is a really good way to put it. You just, we skip that one. we pretend that one doesn't exist. All right, Liam, thank you, man. Very educational. Still probably have some deep reflection to do, trying to figure out, okay, what is my deal with certain front men versus, you know, others that maybe even seem to be very similar in their behaviors and attitudes and personalities. But that might be for another time or a discussion, you know, off the air.
Oh yeah.
But man, seriously, I'm ready to, go digging for a copy of LA Woman and add it to my collection, even if just for the purpose of getting that, experience on vinyl rather than, just pulling it up on my phone or something.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Thank you, Liam. And thanks for listening to Retro Groove. We are part of the Retrologic Network. Check out the website, retrologic.games, for social links, merch, community, and more. And we will see you next time on episode 10 of Retro Groove.
Mr. Mojo Rising. Leave that in.